All right, let me take you back to where it all began. I'm Thomas, by the way. Average guy, average life. Or at least that's what I thought. Life's funny like that, isn't it? One minute you're cruising, thinking you've got it all figured out, and the next, you're in the middle of a story you only hear about in scandalous TV dramas. It all started with these tiny, nagging details. My wife, Julie, she started coming home late. More often than not, her reasons were as thin work's crazy, or traffic was a nightmare. You know, the usual stuff. But something didn't quite add up. It was like a bad song stuck on repeat. Then, one evening, she walked in with this scent clinging to her. A man's cologne. Definitely not mine. That hit me like a ton of bricks. My gut twisted into knots. I remember staring into the mirror, asking myself, is she seeing someone else? So, there I was, turning into some amateur sleuth. I'd rummage through her stuff when she was in the shower, checking her phone for any clue. I felt like a character in some cheap detective novel, but I couldn't help it. The need to know was eating me up inside. One night, I couldn't take the suspense anymore. We were having dinner, the same old silent meal, and I just blurted out, "Are you cheating on me?" Man, the look on her face, it was this mix of surprise and something dark, like she was caught but also a bit thrilled about it. She laughed. Yeah, she actually laughed. It was this cold, hollow sound that seemed to echo around the room. Then she said, "Yes, I am." Just like that, no tears, no drama. But what came next was the real kicker. She wanted me to watch. Said it would spice things up. I felt like I'd been thrown into some twisted reality show. You're probably thinking, walk away, man, but it's not that easy. There was this part of me that needed to understand the why, the how. So, I agreed. Against all logic, against every screaming instinct, I agreed. The day came, and there I was, hidden away, feeling like a total creep. My heart was pounding out of my chest, anger and hurt swirling in a toxic mix. Watching Julie with this other guy, it was surreal. Each touch, each laugh they shared, was a stab right in the gut. But you know what? It also opened my eyes. I saw Julie, not as my wife, but as someone I no longer recognized. Someone who could lie straight to my face, who could twist love into some sick game. And that's when I knew I had to get out, had to turn this whole nightmare on its head. But I wasn't going to leave quietly. No way. I was going to expose the truth, let the world see Julie for who she really was. I started gathering evidence, taking photos, recording conversations. I was a man on a mission, fueled by a mix of heartbreak and this burning desire for justice. I chose our annual dinner party with friends to drop the bomb. I had everything planned out. I'd stand up, glass in hand, and lay it all out. Photos, recordings, the whole 9 yards. I was going to shatter that saintly image Julie had been parading around. And let me tell you, when that moment came, it was like a scene straight out of a movie. The shock, the whispers, Julie's face turning white as a sheet, it was all there. I watched as her world crumbled around her, piece by piece. After that, everything changed. Julie lost her friends, her reputation. Me. I started a new chapter. Sure, the pain was still there, but I had something back, my dignity, my self-respect. A while later, Julie called me, crying, saying she regretted everything. But it was too late. I had moved on, grown stronger from the whole mess. I hung up, looked out the window, and there it was, a clear sky after a storm. I had survived, ready to face whatever came next. You know, there's always that one moment, that split second when everything you've ever believed in comes crashing down around you. For me, that moment was the night I confronted Julie. It was like stepping onto a stage, not knowing if you're about to play the hero or the fool. We were in our living room, the same room where we'd celebrated anniversaries and birthdays. It's funny how a place filled with so many happy memories can suddenly feel like a trap. I remember the way my heart pounded as I looked at her, this woman I thought I knew, and asked the million-dollar question, "Are you cheating on me?" Her reaction, she laughed. Not the kind of laugh that comes from joy or a funny slip-up. No, this was different. It was a laugh that sent shivers down my spine, a sound that seemed to mock everything we had built together. And then, as if her laughter wasn't enough to shatter my world, she admitted it. Just like that, yes, Thomas, I am. But here's where it gets really twisted. She didn't just stop at admitting her affair. She wanted me, yes, me, her husband, to watch her with this other guy. It was like a sick, twisted game to her. "It'll spice things up," she said. I mean, what the hell, right? You're probably thinking I should have walked out right then and there. And you're right, any sane person would have. But there was this part of me, this masochistic, bewildered part, that needed to know more. Why? How did we get here? So, in a decision that defies all logic, I agreed. The following days were a blur. I was living in this daze, trying to wrap my head around what was happening. Part of me hoped it was all a bad dream, that I'd wake up and find everything normal again. But deep down, I knew that wasn't going to happen. Then came the night I had agreed to become a spectator in my own marriage's destruction. I remember hiding in our guest room, feeling like the world's biggest loser. There's something profoundly disturbing about hearing your spouse with someone else, only a few feet away. It was a sensory overload of the worst kind, the sounds, the silences, the muffled laughter. That night, I didn't just see Julie's true colors, I saw my own naivety, my own willingness to turn a blind eye to the signs. It was like watching a car crash in slow motion, horrific, but you can't look away. But, amidst that chaos, something in me snapped. It was this moment of crystal clear clarity. I realized that this wasn't the end for me. No, it was a wake-up call. I was more than this, more than a pawn in Julie's sick game. I started planning right then and there, in the darkness of that guest room. I was going to expose her, let everyone see the kind of person she really was. I wasn't going to be the silent, suffering husband anymore. I was going to take back control of my story. Over the next few days, I became a man on a mission. I gathered evidence, photos, videos, anything that could prove what was happening. It was like I was building an arsenal, preparing for the final showdown. I had to be methodical, careful not to tip Julie off about what I was planning. Every step had to be precise, calculated. And through it all, I was wrestling with my own demons. There were moments of doubt, moments where I wondered if I was doing the right thing. But then I'd remember that night, the laughter, the betrayal, and I'd steel myself again. This was about more than just revenge. This was about reclaiming my dignity, my self-respect. As the day of the big reveal approached, I felt this mix of anxiety and determination. I knew things were going to get ugly, that the fallout would be massive. But I also knew that I couldn't live in the shadows of lies and deceit any longer. I was ready to bring everything into the light, ready to face whatever came next. That's the thing about truth. It's liberating and terrifying all at the same time. And I was about to find out just how much of both it could be. So, there I was, hidden like some kind of spy in my own house. It's a strange thing, to be a fly on the wall in your own life, watching it fall apart. My heart was racing, a mix of cold fury and disbelief. I mean, how did it come to this? Me, Thomas, the guy who always played it safe, now lurking in shadows like a character in some twisted thriller. It was the most humiliating experience of my life, hands down. There I was, crouched in the darkness of our spare room, every fiber of my being screaming to burst out and stop this madness. But I didn't, I just watched, trapped by my own choice, a silent witness to my wife's betrayal. Julie and this guy, they were there, in our living room, our sanctuary. They laughed, they touched, they shared glances. Every one of those moments was like a knife twisting in my gut. I could feel the life we had built together crumbling around me, piece by piece. But you know what? Amidst all that pain and anger, something else was happening to me. It was like I was seeing Julie for the first time, not as my wife, but as a stranger. A stranger filled with lies and deceit. All those years, all those memories, they seemed to fade into the background, overshadowed by the reality of who she had become. I remember thinking, who is this woman? She wasn't the Julie I thought I knew. This Julie was cold, calculating, playing this sick game without a care for the wreckage she was leaving behind. It was like watching a mask fall off, revealing a face I had never really known. The realization hit me hard. I had been living a lie, a comfortable, convenient lie. As I watched them, a part of me was dissecting every interaction, every laugh, every touch. I was trying to understand, to find some kind of reason behind this madness. Was it something I did? Was it something I didn't do? But the more I watched, the more I understood that this wasn't about me. This was about Julie and the choices she had made. There's something profoundly sobering about seeing someone you love as the person they truly are, not the person you believe them to be. It's like waking up from a dream, only to find yourself in a nightmare. But in a strange way, it was also a wake-up call. I realized I couldn't be the victim in my own story. I couldn't let this define me. As the night wore on, my initial shock and hurt began to morph into something else, a resolve. I wasn't going to let this break me. I was going to come out of this stronger, smarter. I started planning my next moves. It wasn't just about exposing Julie anymore, it was about reclaiming my life, my identity. I continued to watch, to observe. Every detail was etched into my memory, not out of a desire to remember, but as fuel for my resolve. It was like gathering ammunition for the upcoming battle. I knew that the road ahead would be tough, that what I was planning would turn our lives upside down. But I also knew that there was no going back to the way things were. That life, that version of me, was gone. As I quietly made my way back to my room that night, a sense of clarity settled over me. It was a clarity born from pain and betrayal, but clarity nonetheless. I knew what I had to do, and I was ready to do it. Looking back, that night was a turning point for me. It was the night I stopped being a passive observer in my own life and started taking control. It was the night I began the journey of finding out who I really was, away from the shadows of a love that had turned into a lie. You know, there's a point in every person's life when they realize enough is enough. For me, that realization came crashing down like a ton of bricks after that night of playing the reluctant voyeur in my own marriage. I couldn't live in that farce anymore, not for a second longer. It was time for a revolt, time to take back the reins of my life. So, I started planning my exit. It wasn't just about walking away, it was about exposing the truth, about making sure Julie couldn't just sweet-talk her way out of this one. I turned into this guy with a mission, a purpose. I was done being the clueless husband. It was time to be the director of my own life's movie. I started gathering evidence like a pro. I had photos, recordings, you name it. Every piece was a part of this grotesque puzzle that had become my life. It felt surreal, going through our shared life and picking out the lies and the deceit. Each photo I took, each recording I made, was a step towards freeing myself from this web of betrayal. I'd be lying if I said it was easy. It was gut-wrenching. Each piece of evidence was a reminder of how far we had fallen, of how much I had lost. But it was necessary. I needed to see the full picture, to understand the extent of Julie's betrayal. It was the only way I could move forward. It wasn't just about the physical evidence, though. I started noting down times, dates, inconsistencies in her stories. I became this human lie detector, analyzing every word, every gesture. It was exhausting, living in a constant state of alertness, but it was also empowering. I was no longer the guy who got played, I was the guy who was fighting back. As I compiled all this evidence, I started feeling this mix of anger and relief. Angry because of all the lies, the deceit, the sheer audacity of it all, but relieved because I was finally seeing things as they were, not as I wanted them to be. It was like I was slowly shedding this skin of naivety and stepping into a new, more resilient self. I also had to think about the aftermath. Exposing Julie wasn't going to just be a mic drop moment, it was going to have repercussions. Our friends, our families, everyone would be affected by this. But I couldn't let that stop me. I had to stand up for the truth, for my own sanity. I remember the night before I decided to reveal everything. I couldn't sleep. I kept going over everything in my head, playing out different scenarios. Part of me was scared of what was to come, but a bigger part of me was resolute. I had come too far to back down now. The next day, I felt this strange calmness as I prepared for the confrontation. It was like I was in the eye of the storm, the chaos swirling around me, but inside, I was at peace. I knew what I had to do, and I was ready to do it. I chose a dinner party at our friend's place for the big reveal. It had to be public, irrefutable. Julie wouldn't be able to twist the narrative in front of an audience. I had all the evidence on my phone, ready to be shown. I wasn't just going to tell them, I was going to show them. As we got ready for the party, Julie was her usual self, unaware of the storm that was about to hit. I played along, keeping my cards close to my chest. It was a game of poker, and I was about to play my winning hand. Walking into that party, I felt a mix of nerves and determination. I greeted our friends, made small talk, all the while knowing that in a few moments, everything was going to change. It was surreal, like being in a movie where you know a plot twist is about to happen. And then, as we sat down for dinner, with everyone gathered around, I stood up. My heart was pounding, but my voice was steady. I have something to share, I said. And with that, I began the most difficult, the most liberating speech of my life. So there I was, at this dinner with our closest friends, the kind of gathering where you'd usually share good news, maybe a promotion or a new baby on the way. But me? I was about to drop a bombshell that would turn this cozy little get-together into a scene straight out of a daytime drama. The air was filled with the usual chatter and laughter, the clinking of glasses, the kind of comfortable noise that comes with good company and too much wine. Julie was there, of course, playing her part to perfection, the doting wife, all smiles and grace. It was almost enough to make me doubt myself, almost. I remember feeling like I was in some sort of trance as dinner progressed. Each course that came and went was like a ticking clock, counting down to the moment of truth. My stomach was in knots, but there was also this growing sense of determination. I wasn't just doing this for me, I was doing it for the sake of truth, for reality over pretense. Finally, as dessert was being served, and everyone was relaxed into that post-meal contentment, I stood up. The room fell silent, all eyes on me. There was this moment of collective expectation, like they were all waiting for a toast or some kind of announcement. Thanks, everyone, for this lovely evening, I started, my voice surprisingly steady. But I have something important to share, something that can't wait any longer. I took out my phone, where I'd stored all the evidence, the photos, the messages, the recordings. Julie's face was a picture of confusion, then slowly, as she realized what was happening, it morphed into fear. Thomas, what are you doing? She whispered, but I barely heard her. I began showing the photos, one by one, on the TV screen. The room was deadly silent. The only sound was the clicking as I changed from one image to the next. Pictures of Julie and her lover, timestamps clear as day. There were gasps. Someone let out a low whistle, like they couldn't believe what they were seeing. Then I played the recordings, snippets of conversations, plans they'd made. It was damning, irrefutable. The Julie in those recordings was a far cry from the saintly figure she presented to the world. The reaction around the room was a mix of shock, disbelief, and in some cases, anger. Our friends, people who had known us for years, looked at Julie like they were seeing her for the first time. She tried to speak, to explain, but her words fell flat. The evidence was too overwhelming. Julie's face was ashen, her usual composure shattered. She looked around the room, probably realizing that these were faces she might never see again, at least not in the same way. There was a sense of betrayal hanging in the air, a sense of having been fooled by someone they considered a friend. I didn't take any pleasure in doing this. It wasn't about revenge, it was about setting the record straight. For so long, Julie had controlled the narrative, painted this picture of a perfect life, a perfect marriage. But now, the truth was out, raw and unfiltered. After the last recording played, the room was silent. You could cut the tension with a knife. I looked at Julie, and for a brief moment, I felt sorry for her. But then I remembered all the lies, the deceit, and any sympathy I had evaporated. I sat down, my part done. The rest of the evening was a blur. There were arguments, people taking sides, some trying to console Julie, others looking at me with what I hoped was respect. The perfect evening had turned into a battleground, with our marriage as the casualty. As I left the party, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. I had done what I needed to do. The journey ahead would be tough, no doubt about that. But for the first time in a long while, I felt like I was walking towards something real, something honest. The facade was gone, and in its place was the truth, harsh but liberating. Let me tell you, the aftermath of that dinner party was like the aftermath of a hurricane. It tore through our lives, leaving a trail of destruction in its wake. Julie, once the center of our social circle, the life of every party, found herself in a freefall. Her friends, our friends, they all pulled away one by one, like leaves from a dying tree. And her reputation, which she had so carefully curated over the years, crumbled like a house of cards. In the days that followed, I watched as Julie grappled with her new reality. The phone calls that went unanswered, the invitations that stopped coming, the whispered conversations that fell silent when she walked into a room. It was a steep fall from grace, and she felt every inch of it. But me? I was starting over, sure. The pain was still there, a constant companion in those early days. But alongside the pain was something new, something I hadn't felt in a long time, a sense of dignity, of self-worth. I was no longer the man who had been cheated on, deceived, and humiliated. I was the man who stood up for himself, who demanded the truth, even when it was hard. Starting over wasn't easy. I had to find a new place to live, figure out how to be Thomas again, not just half of Thomas and Julie. I dove into work, into hobbies I had long neglected, into friendships that had been pushed to the sidelines during my marriage. It was a process, a slow rebuilding of the life I had before Julie, or maybe a building of something entirely new. There were moments, of course, when doubt crept in, when the loneliness felt overwhelming. Nights when I'd scroll through my phone, tempted to call Julie or to check up on her. But then I'd remember that night, the look in her eyes when the truth came out, and I'd put the phone down. That chapter of my life was closed, and I was writing a new one. As the weeks turned into months, I watched as Julie tried to claw her way back into the lives of our friends, but it was no use. The trust was broken, the image shattered. She had been a master at playing the perfect wife, the perfect friend, but now everyone had seen behind the curtain. It was a hard lesson, but one she had brought upon herself. Meanwhile, My own life was taking shape in ways I hadn't expected. I reconnected with old friends, made new ones, started dating again. It was strange, at first, to be on my own, but it was also exhilarating. I was rediscovering who I was outside of my marriage, outside of Julie's shadow. I won't lie and say it was all smooth sailing. There were setbacks, days when the memories would come rushing back, when the hurt would flare up anew. But each time, I'd pick myself up, remind myself of how far I'd come, and keep moving forward. Looking back, I can see that Julie's fall was a necessary end to our story. It was painful, messy, and full of heartache, but it was also cleansing. It swept away the lies, the pretense, and left us both with nothing but the truth. And in that truth, I found my freedom, my chance to start anew. Julie lost a lot, her friends, her standing in our community, the respect of people she cared about. But I like to think that in that loss, she found something too, a chance to start over, to rebuild herself into someone better, someone real. I don't know if she took that chance, but I hope she did. As for me, I learned a lot about myself, about what I'm capable of, about what really matters in life. I learned that dignity isn't just about how others see you, it's about how you see yourself. It's about standing up for what's right, even when it's hard, even when it hurts. So, yeah, the fall was hard for both of us. But from that fall, we both had the chance to rise again, to rebuild from the rubble. And that's exactly what I did. So, there I was, months down the line, finally feeling like I was getting my feet back under me. It's strange how life works. You go through this storm, thinking it's never going to end, and then one day, you wake up and realize you've made it through. That's where I was, rebuilding, finding a new normal, when out of the blue, Julie called. I remember staring at my phone, her name flashing on the screen, feeling this surge up. I don't know, a mix of emotions, really. Curiosity, a twinge of the old pain, and this underlying sense of finality. I answered, more out of a sense of closure than anything else. Her voice came through, and it was like I was transported back in time. She was crying, her words broken by sobs. She said she was sorry, that she regretted everything, that she had lost so much and realized too late what she had thrown away. It was a stark contrast to the confident, almost arrogant Julie I had confronted months ago. But as I listened to her, I felt this profound sense of detachment. Her words, once capable of cutting me to the core, now seemed distant, like echoes from a past life. I had moved on, emotionally, mentally. The man who had loved Julie, who had been devastated by her betrayal, he didn't exist anymore. In his place was someone stronger, wiser, someone who had learned to value himself. I told her that I forgave her, not for her sake, but for mine. Forgiveness is funny like that. It's less about giving someone else peace and more about giving peace to yourself. I wished her well, hoped she would find her way to a better, more honest life, but I made it clear that the chapter of us was closed, forever. Hanging up, I felt this final piece slot into place. It was like the last note of a song, the final brushstroke on a painting. That call, it wasn't just an end to our conversation, it was an end to the story that had been Julie and me. I walked over to the window, looking out at the world outside. The sky was clear, the kind of deep, serene blue that comes after a storm. It was peaceful, quiet, a stark contrast to the turmoil that had been my life for so long. Standing there, I realized that I had survived, not just survived, but come out stronger. That whole ordeal with Julie, as painful and as messy as it was, had been a crucible, burning away the parts of me that were no longer needed, forging something. All this time I was sure that our marriage was strong and reliable. I was ready to do everything to make our life happy and full of love. But one day I discovered that my wife was only using me as a means to her own ends. She had cheated on me, and it was not the first time. I realized that all along she had her own plan, and I was just a puppet in her hands. But I wasn't going to stay idle and decided to get back at her for her betrayal. Matvey and Alina had known each other since high school. The boy had been in love with the first beauty of their school for many years and once even worked up the courage to ask her out. But she sharply rejected him. She preferred to go out with a cocky high school student named Pasha. He seemed mature and very cool to her. Matvey sometimes heard other girls whispering behind his back discussing his unrequited love. And Alina herself was with Pavel right up until graduation. After graduation, Matvey studied at university working in parallel, and after graduation began to rise by leaps and bounds on the career ladder. He managed to get a job at an international company. He began to earn a lot of money. He bought himself a spacious apartment and a nice car and helped his parents. He also liked to travel. The impressions of travel greatly energized him. One day, he was invited to another meeting of classmates. Matvey decided to go there for a change. It was there that his meeting with Alina took place many years later. When she saw Matvey, she could not even believe her eyes. The man, though clothed, was restrained, but she roughly understood the cost of all these things on him. They were talking. Alina questioned her former suitor with great interest about what he was living now. And by the minute she was getting more and more into some kind of relationship with him. They exchanged phone numbers, and the next day Alina was the first to call. Now after all these years she herself made a date with Matvey. Over all these years he had not lost his warm feelings for Alina. And although in the past she had rejected him and dated someone else, none of that mattered. Now they met as adults. And Matvey was glad that Alina was finally interested in him herself. Their relationship began very quickly. Alina knew what she wanted from this life. So the slow development of the novel did not interest her. Their wedding took place just 6 months later. Although Matvey's parents tried to tell him it was too soon. And it was still necessary to get to know each other better. They began to travel together. Matvey showed his wife various countries and their local colors. Alina watched everything with her mouth open and was as excited as a child. When they returned to their city, the woman began to take more and more of her work from Hula, explaining that she was not feeling well. At the same time, she often began to complain to her husband that she was very tired of working. Her bosses didn't appreciate her, and she felt that she was wasting her time there. These were no longer subtle hints, but real manipulations. And Matvey fell for it. He still could not rejoice that the love of his youth, now his lawful spouse. Of course, after all this talk, he himself suggested that she quit her job and rest at home. He would take care of everything. Alina's dream finally came true. She lives in her husband's luxurious apartment. He allows her not to work and does not deny her anything. They lived like this for a few more years. And then her husband's business trip, which lasted several weeks, happened. He and his wife would call each other late at night. But sometimes she would miss a call, claiming that she was very tired from the day. When Matvey returned, it was as if the atmosphere in his home had changed. His wife did not welcome him with the same joy as usual. She acted rather reserved and even a little aloof, which really hurt the man. He thought she had something going on or was just in a bad mood. So he didn't emphasize it. Intuitively, he sensed that something was wrong, but he didn't give it much thought. During the next month that he was in town, his wife's being just as slightly different. She started spending more and more time with her girlfriends, sometimes returning home, and even later than her husband. When Matvey asked her what she was doing all that time away from home, she said that her best friend was also out of work now, and they went to salons and sports centers together or just went for a walk. One day Matvey was supposed to have a business meeting at a restaurant in the center of town. On that day things did not go well from the very morning. First, he left important documents at home, and on his way back to pick them up, he was late for work. Then some minor mishaps at the office threw him off balance. And now he was stuck in a traffic jam not far from that very restaurant. As he sat in his car, irritably texting his colleague that he might be late because of the traffic situation, his attention was caught by two silhouettes gliding outside the window. Matvey looked up and saw a couple. His wife was walking with some man and was hanging out with him interestedly. The husband's previously unknown feeling of jealousy pricked him. He could see for sure that it was his wife and how she was enjoying herself in the company of another man. Interesting choice of girlfriends she has, of course, he thought irritatedly. The traffic was moving very slowly and Matvey decided to follow where the two men were going. They were going straight to the restaurant where Matvey himself was headed. After about 10 minutes, all the cars parted and the man was able to turn around and park beside the place. He went in very carefully, looking around to see where his wife was sitting, but at the same time not to get caught. He was lucky. The table at which his meeting was taking place was at a decent distance from the table where Alina was sitting with her companion. While this colleague was talking to his partners, Matvey was watching his wife without blinking. At last he could make out who she was with. The face seemed painfully familiar, but the man had to strain his memory hard to figure out who it was. With horror to himself, he recognized in her companion, Paul, the same one Alina had dated back in high school. With each passing minute, his faith in the best was evaporating faster and faster. Alina openly flirted with Pasha, and at one point he began stroking her thigh. Matvey desperately wanted to take out the anger that was boiling inside of him on these two, but he was held hostage to the situation. The meeting was very important. He could not lose face. As a result, the man thought, since these two were acting this way, their relationship had not lasted the first day. Yes, he was hurt because of this infidelity. He was ready to tear up and throw up. But he understood that these emotions would not make things better. He could deal with the unfaithful spouse later, but now he had better things to do. He concentrated on the negotiations and held them to the highest standard. Alina and her lover left before he did. It was obvious they were in a hurry to finally get some privacy. Afterwards, Matvey drove home. He threw all of Alina's belongings into bags and took them to the nearest garbage can. When the traitor returned home, she was extremely surprised. The door was locked from the inside with a latch. Then her husband opened it. He said that now she no longer lived here, and if she had time, she could still fight the local bums at the dump for her clothes. The woman first thought her husband was joking, but when the door slammed in her face, she realized that he had found out. The couple divorced. Matvey was even glad that his mother had insisted on a prenuptial agreement before the wedding. It turned out to be very convenient. Alina never once apologized to Matvey for her betrayal. Nothing bad happened for her. She simply acted out of self-interest. For a long time after school, she was constantly on and off with Pavel because he could not provide her with everything. But when she found out that Pavel's financial situation had improved, she was the first to make contact. In fact, he was the only one she really loved. But his plight a few years ago prevented her from staying with him. She met Matthew and realized that he could give her the life she wanted. Now she began to live with Pavel again. Matvey understood that Alina would forever be the one who would be constantly on the lookout for a better place. She would change her partners an endless number of times without sticking with anyone for long. Instead of building a future with her husband, helping him and reaching for the heights together, she has chosen to live a parasitic lifestyle. But life is complicated, and staying on the crest of success all the time won't work. Black bars happen to everyone. So the claim that Paul was lucky to stay with such a woman together was highly questionable. She would stay with him, but only until his first bad luck. Second story. I might never have known the truth about my wife. But when my friend suddenly showed up with the words, "I need to tell you something about your wife," I felt something was wrong. I couldn't even think what he was going to say. But what followed was so amazing that I didn't know what to do next. It turned out that my wife had been cheating on me for months, and my friend had known about it all along. He told me everything he knew, and I decided to take justice into my own hands. I got my revenge on her for cheating. In this video, I will tell you the whole story, and you will learn how I found out the truth about my wife, and how I decided to get revenge on her. Ruslan and Sophia had been married for 6 years. Sonia was a manicurist, and Ruslan worked for a small company as a landscape designer. A couple of years ago, they took an apartment on a mortgage, and were gradually fixing it up. The couple had been trying for over a year to have a child. Both were ready to take on the role of parents, but nothing worked, even though they had already had some tests done, and everything was normal. They did not want to take any drastic steps, so they just kept hoping that someday they would finally get lucky. Ruslan had a good friend whose name was Andrew. The man, unlike his companion, was lonely and lived alone. He did not have much luck in relationships. At some point, he had already accepted this state of affairs and stopped busting his neck to get acquainted with anyone. He was comfortable enough as it was. They had met in high school and had been in touch ever since. As adults, they didn't see each other that often. When they did meet, it was as if they hadn't been together all that time. One afternoon, Andrew was going about his business and decided to walk through the park. His head was occupied with the repairs he was making, so he hardly paid any attention to those who passed him by. Suddenly, he stumbled over some rock in the middle of the path, and it snapped him out of his heap of thoughts. He glanced around to see if anyone had noticed his fall, when suddenly, he spotted a familiar silhouette ahead. He stepped a little closer and recognized her. It was Sophia, his friend's wife. She was walking in the company of a man. "Sonia, hello," shouted Andrew, walking a little closer. The woman turned around. "Andrew, hello. I didn't expect to see you here." The man had already held out his hand to her companion to say hello. "Andre Kostia." At that moment, the woman tensed a little. She bit her lip and then said with a laugh, "This is my brother. He came to town for the day, here to give us a tour. We're really in a bit of a hurry, sorry." Andrew replied that it was no big deal. He asked him to say hello to Ruslan, and then they said goodbye. He stared intently at Constantine's face. Something tensed him in the whole situation. It was either Sanja's reaction or her hurry. For a second, he even thought there was far from a kinship between these two. But the telephone call from a client distracted him, pushing the man's doubts away. In the flow of events and working moments, Andrew had completely forgotten about the situation in the park. He was not even surprised at the absence of a call from Ruslan. Usually, if he said hello to him through his acquaintances, he considered it his duty to call and meet him. But the friend did not show up until a few months later. One evening, Ruslan dialed his comrade and informed him in a joyful voice that soon he would finally become a father. You know, nothing much had happened before that. And here is the real news, and I decided to share it with you. Andrew sincerely congratulated his friend. He knew how long he and his wife had come to this. At the end of the year, in the winter, Ruslan even invited him to the maternity hospital to be discharged. Afterward, they sat together for a while and celebrated. Later, there was a lull. The couple fully immersed themselves in taking care of the baby. The world began to revolve around him. From time to time, they would write to each other. But for the most part, Ruslan was immersed in his work to provide his family with everything they needed. They had not seen each other for over a year. And one day on his day off, Andrew was passing through the neighborhood where his comrade lived. He had to pick up an order at the pickup point, which was in their house. And by happy coincidence, he met Ruslan in the street. He was strolling along with the stroller. Andre shouted at him, and he gestured for him to keep his voice down. The child dozed off. It turned out that his wife had sent him for a walk with his son and wanted to relax and unwind. The friends were talking. Andrew looked at the little boy and asked if he could tell what the child looked like. He looked more like his mother. He didn't take anything from me as if he didn't like it, apparently. He made a joke. My friend did not appreciate the joke. He suddenly remembered seeing his wife with some stranger, whom she introduced as her brother. And this was not long before the news of the pregnancy. I'm sorry, don't take this the wrong way, but have you ever considered that the baby might not be yours? Andre asked seriously. Ruslan looked at him like he was crazy. He laughed and asked why he suddenly thought so. A friend snapped and decided to tell him that he had seen his wife with someone in the park at the time. After that, Ruslan was not so cheerful anymore. Well, hello. She certainly didn't tell me from you. She didn't say that she saw you at all. And your brother? Kostya, you say? She doesn't have any brothers and I don't remember any cousins. He said thoughtfully. And she certainly did not tell me that any of her relatives visited her at that time. This news shook Ruslan. He still felt euphoric that he finally had his heir. Besides, he had always found that he and his wife had a good relationship. But now doubts about his wife's faithfulness had settled in his mind. Yes, and at a time when they were ready to give up, and she suddenly became pregnant. At that time, Ruslan thought it was a miracle. But now everything was covered with a shroud of doubt. He thanked his friend for telling him about the incident, even though it was so much later. That night, he had waited for his wife's return more anxiously than ever before. He knew there was a serious talk to be had. As he waited for her, sitting in complete silence in the kitchen, he went over in his head all the suspicious things that he might in the past have simply turned a blind eye to. When their next attempt to have a baby failed, he felt at one point as if his wife had grown cold to the idea altogether. She didn't say she'd changed her mind, but you could feel it in the look on her face. Then there was even some coldness between them, but Ruslan put it down to hormonal background. The man decided to call his mother-in-law and find out from the source whether there was a certain Constantine among his wife's brothers after all. He veiled this strange question by saying that a certain man came to their house when Sonia was away and introduced himself as her brother. Our fears had already been confirmed. There was no such man among her cousins or even third cousins. When the man hung up, Sonia had just returned home. After she had checked on the baby, the man decided to start a conversation. He began from afar, mentioning Kostya, who had recently dropped in on her as if to visit. Ruslan decided not to specify the degree of their relationship and just watched her reaction. Sonia did not make eye contact. She constantly looked away. When the man's name came up, it was as if she tensed up. But she tried not to show it. Do you know him, dear? Her husband asked in a calm tone. Yes, he's a former colleague. And what did he want? Pronounced Sonia. He wanted to see his child. The husband decided to go along with the provocation. Sonia went dramatically pale and didn't blink for a couple of seconds. She opened and closed her mouth like a fish on dry land. Ruslan decided to squeeze her. So he's right, isn't he? You didn't cheat with him, did you? It seems time to do a paternity test. His words thundered to his wife. Then she tried to pull herself together. I've been agonizing for hours to give you a son. And you're doing this to me. She howled. Well, if it really is my baby, what do you have to worry about? Her husband said calmly. The expression on the woman's face was as if she were ready to burst with anger. Forgetting about the sleeping baby, she started yelling at her husband for trying to avoid responsibility for the baby like a coward. She threatened that now she would go to her mother and Ruslan would never see her again. Then she tearfully began packing her belongings. The expertise made it clear that the baby was not Ruslan after all. After that, he and Sonia scandalously divorced. The man was both angry and depressed by this news. He had already managed to get used to the role of the father, attached to this little lump of happiness. All this time, Andra had been by Ruslan's side and supported him in this difficult period. Sonia went to her parents. By then, she had long been out of touch with her lover. But now, feeling vulnerable, she tried to resume communication with him. But Kostya himself was not eager to do so. He already had his own family, and he did not care about Sonia. So, in an attempt to deceive her husband, the woman lost her own game. Such is the story. Share in the comments what you think about this situation and the behavior. I am a 40-year-old man and my wife, Miley, is 38 years old. We tied the knot 5 years ago, but our love story began at the wedding of my friend Noah. On that special day, I attended as a groomsman, while Miley took part as one of the bridesmaids. It was during the ceremony that Miley's captivating confidence caught my attention as she gracefully donned a beautiful green maxi dress. As I gazed at her, my attention completely consumed. I clumsily spilled cocktails all over myself. It was a comical moment that caught Miley's eye, and we burst into uncontrollable laughter together. Amidst the laughter, she kindly offered her assistance, helping me clean the mess from my shirt. It was evident to her that I was attracted to her, but my hesitance prevented me from making a move. However, Miley, with her laid-back demeanor and stunning appearance, took the initiative and struck up a conversation with me. Her charm and beauty were simply irresistible. While I had always been skeptical about love at first sight, meeting Miley shattered my doubts. From the moment our eyes met, I knew she was the one for me. As our relationship blossomed after Noah's wedding, Miley extended an invitation for me to meet her parents. It was during this time that our commitment deepened, and we realized we wanted to spend our lives together. However, our journey faced a hurdle when Miley's father expressed his concerns about our relationship. He held a strong desire for his daughter to marry a wealthy businessman, which posed a challenge for our union. During my visit to their home, I was taken aback when Miley's father had the audacity to belittle me, referring to me as an average man. He went on to insult my financial standing, expressing his disapproval of his daughter marrying someone who he deemed to be earning insufficient income. It was a hurtful moment as he compared my modest earnings to Miley's remarkable beauty, likening her to a Hollywood actress. Despite the fact that I held the position of a brand manager at a reputable marketing agency and was earning a respectable income, his shallow and demeaning remarks provoked my outrage. In response, I firmly stood my ground, expressing my disappointment and reminding him that true worth extends far beyond material wealth. Due to the man's overwhelming narcissism, Miley adeptly handled the situation, demonstrating her loyalty by standing by my side and confronting her father. With her unwavering support, Miley chose to leave her parents' house and embark on a new chapter with me. Merely a week later, we organized an intimate ceremony to celebrate our union and exchanged vows, bringing us great joy. Having such an understanding and encouraging partner as my wife filled me with immense happiness, particularly as Miley deliberately chose to invite her mother alone, omitting her father from the guest list. Our initial year of marriage overflowed with bliss and contentment. Nevertheless, as our journey progressed, I began to observe certain traits in Miley that mirrored those of her father. Growing up, her parents had showered her with abundant love, leading to a sense of entitlement within her. She frequently insisted on being treated like royalty, expecting unwavering obedience to her desires. Any disagreement I expressed was promptly dismissed as a mere dispute, as she held an expectation for me to comply with her every demand without hesitation or inquiry. During our furniture shopping for our home, I found that Miley had little regard for my opinions. My suggestions were consistently overlooked, and when I expressed my preference for white sofas over the green ones, she blew the situation out of proportion. Her tendency to become upset and throw tantrums over seemingly trivial matters became evident. On one occasion, I mistakenly purchased chocolate ice cream instead of her beloved blueberry flavor, which led Miley to burst into uncontrollable tears. It became apparent that she was unaccustomed to hearing the word no in her life. With no job or career, she dedicated the majority of her time to socializing with friends and indulging in shopping expeditions. I came to the realization that Miley had inherited her father's traits, but I was not prepared to surrender or blindly comply with her demands. I made it clear that as a married couple, I had the right to express my opinions, and I expected her to exhibit maturity if we were to build a successful marriage. I conveyed that without mutual understanding and respect, our marriage would be untenable. Miley was taken aback by my assertion since she had never encountered the word no before. Overwhelmed with emotion, she sobbed and sincerely pledged to modify her behavior. Although it was an unfamiliar experience for her, she was determined to make an earnest effort because she professed a deep love for me. Recognizing that her father bore responsibility for her spoiled demeanor, I chose to grant her an opportunity for growth, driven by my own love for her. Miley began taking gradual steps to demonstrate her commitment to patience and kindness towards me. She secured a part-time job and enrolled in a course, showcasing her willingness to take responsibility and contribute to our lives. Rather than spending her days socializing with friends, she made the effort to accompany me when we met our mutual friends, Noah and his wife, Emily. While Emily had been Miley's childhood friend, she starkly contrasted with her in terms of personality and demeanor. Miley's childhood friend, Emily, presented herself as a composed, mature, and intelligent woman, providing a stark contrast to Miley's previous behavior. As Noah was my closest friend, we frequently engaged in collaborative efforts, working on various business ideas together. This led to frequent visits between our households. Through our unwavering dedication and hard work, Noah and I successfully launched our product, which translated into substantial financial gains. As a result, we transitioned from residing in cramped apartments to spacious, comfortable houses, marking a significant improvement in our living conditions. Upon hearing about my accomplishments, my father-in-law's perception of me began to soften, prompting him to initiate casual phone conversations. Initially, I harbored reluctance to engage with him, but with encouragement from Emily and Noah, who desired for me to let go of the past and extend forgiveness, I decided to answer his calls. Eventually, I embraced the idea and extended an invitation to my in-laws, welcoming them to our new home. When my father-in-law accepted the invitation and visited our opulent abode, he was taken aback by the extent of our newfound prosperity, as he had never anticipated my success. It was his own ill-treatment and misbehavior that fueled my desire for wealth, serving as the impetus for me to tirelessly work day and night to achieve my goals. However, he persisted in pressuring both Miley and me to start a family, despite our reservations and personal preferences. Ironically, the man who initially opposed his daughter's union with me now expressed a sudden desire for us to have children. Recognizing his tendency to intrude in our lives, I maintained a reasonable distance from him. However, last year during Christmas, Miley's parents insisted that we host a grand dinner at our home, urging us to include a wide range of guests. In response, I extended invitations to Noah and his family, as well as my own parents and brothers, fostering an atmosphere of togetherness and celebration. Miley's parents insisted that I extend invitations to their friends and relatives for the Christmas dinner, citing their absence at our wedding as the reason. It became evident that their motivation was not solely to introduce their son-in-law to their acquaintances, but rather to showcase their connections and display our lavish house and wealth. Despite their desires, I declined to invite a large number of people, choosing instead to maintain a more intimate gathering. Nonetheless, Miley did invite a select few of her parents' friends and relatives to the dinner. During the Christmas dinner party, my parents and Noah's family arrived dressed in casual yet appropriate attire for the occasion. However, I was taken aback when Miley's family appeared in overly formal and extravagant attire, as if they were attending a wedding rather than a casual gathering. To my surprise, friends and relatives of my in-laws began to act as if they were in their own home, dancing and utilizing our space without restraint. Miley had chosen to wear a short black dress, and the lively atmosphere had transformed our home into a bustling party scene, resembling more of a bar than a traditional Christmas dinner. This stark contrast to our usual quiet and simple family gatherings left me feeling uneasy. Observing the turn of events, my parents, who preferred a more tranquil atmosphere, made the decision to depart early, sensing that the gathering had evolved into something more akin to a disco than a traditional Christmas celebration. As the evening progressed, my father-in-law busily showcased our house, cars, and various possessions to his friends, while their children joined Miley on the dance floor. Meanwhile, Noah's family and I remained focused on enjoying our dinner and paid little attention to these unfamiliar guests. After our meal, Noah and Emily decided to leave early, having fulfilled their obligations for the evening. Feeling deeply dissatisfied with the party's turn of events, I expressed my frustration to Miley, emphasizing the need to bring the gathering to a close. Understanding my sentiments, Miley reassured me that she would take charge and asked me to retreat upstairs for some rest. Battling a pounding headache and growing anger towards Miley and her parents' eccentric friends, I locked myself in my room and sought solace in sleep. Awakening around 3 a.m. from a disturbing dream, I noticed Miley's absence beside me. Curiosity piqued, I decided to descend the stairs to investigate. To my astonishment and growing anger, I found the entire house shrouded in darkness, devoid of any illumination. The unsettling revelation awaited me as I discovered the lingering presence of the previous guests, who were now leisurely lounging on the carpets and sofas, seemingly undeterred by the late hour. Furious at this discovery, my frustration mounted further. Unable to locate Miley or her parents in the main living areas, I expanded my search to other rooms within the house. Eventually, I discovered her parents fast asleep in our designated guest room. Growing more concerned, I decided to call Miley's phone in an attempt to determine her whereabouts. As the ringtone echoed from within the house, I realized that the sound was emanating from another guest room. Sensing something amiss, I swiftly disconnected the call and cautiously entered the room to investigate. As I opened the door, a wave of shock washed over me when I found Miley alone in the room with an unfamiliar man, engaging in a highly inappropriate situation. Overwhelmed with anger and disbelief, I instinctively reached for my phone, capturing video evidence of the scene before me. In a fit of rage, I confronted Miley, dousing her with water, causing her to be taken aback by my sudden presence as she had assumed I would be asleep and unaware until the morning. I punched the guy and threw him out of my house after yelling and making a scene. When Miley's parents and other guests woke up from my shouting, Miley's father explained that it was all a misunderstanding and that the man was his friend's kid. I told him to shut up. When Miley cried and begged me to give her another chance, I slapped her. However, her father persisted in offering feeble explanations, downplaying the severity of the situation and insinuating that I was overreacting. His entitled demeanor became increasingly apparent now that I had attained wealth, as he seemed appalled at the mere thought of me leaving his daughter. He proposed that, as a family matter, we should address it in the morning, sparing our guests the spectacle of a public confrontation. Reaching my breaking point, I no longer had any concern for the guests or my unfaithful wife. Therefore, I decisively ushered them all out of my house, even though it was the dead of night. Subsequently, I took the necessary steps to end my marriage by mailing divorce papers to Miley. The process of finalizing the divorce took months, during which time Noah and my other friends stood by me, offering their support. Unfortunately, my greedy father-in-law attempted to manipulate and extort money from me. However, I was fortunate enough to possess irrefutable evidence of his daughter's infidelity, which ultimately worked in my favor. Despite Miley's persistent pleas for another chance, acknowledging her affairs and expressing remorse, I remained resolute in my decision. While she attempted to shift the blame onto her father, assuming that by doing so, I would easily forgive her. I recognized that accepting responsibility for her actions was crucial for true growth. While I had initially given her opportunities due to her entitled behavior stemming from her upbringing, the betrayal caused by her infidelity was a breach of trust that I couldn't overlook. However, I found it challenging to forgive infidelity, as I firmly believe that it is a conscious choice. Miley, being a grown woman, was well aware of the implications of her actions and must take responsibility for them. It became evident that Miley's relationship with her parents was strained, largely due to the stark contrast between the affluent lifestyle she had become accustomed to with me and the dynamics of her upbringing. Despite Miley's persistent attempts to contact me, I have firmly decided against any possibility of reconciliation. I have found happiness in my life, having started a relationship with Noah's sister, and I am genuinely content with the way things are. Sometimes, being alone is far better than being surrounded by individuals who exhibit greed and entitlement. The presence of such people can be incompatible with one's own values and can disrupt any sense of harmony or coexistence. Thank you for listening to the story to the end, and if you like it, please support us with a like, as well as subscribe to our channel. Write in the comments what